Hey, Jamie here, and welcome to Module 9, Part 2, Preparation and Practice, where we're going to break down specifically step by step how you can best put yourself in a position to outperform in your interviews. And at this point, maybe you know you have an interview coming up, or maybe you don't. Either way, you want to move through this and get the preparation and the practice done. If you remember from Module 8, Creating Your Opportunities, what we talked about was that there are always three things that you're doing. One, you're constantly doing your professional networking and building that fire. Secondly, is you're always improving yourself. You're always doing some type of personal development, whether that's reading, improving your technical skills, an online course, or some other means of developing yourself. But then the third thing is you're always doing interview prep. And even if that's 15 minutes a day because you've already done everything, or if you're ramping up and just starting, you're allocating a little bit more time. But you're always doing some sort of interview prep. Okay, so in this, we're going to break down what are the 6 primary areas for interview prep, how do you best prepare for all 6 areas, and then how to best communicate in an interview, and how to best practice your communication and delivery for the interview. Now, to start with, before we dive into anything, I want to bring up a picture that I personally love. So, the man with the ball is LeBron James. And many people know he is a killer on the court. He's one of the best basketball players of all time. And this picture it's not just about LeBron James. It's about Michael Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, Steph Curry, many of the greats of basketball that people know their names. The reason people know their names is because this is what they're seeing on the television. Now, the reason these people are the best is because they spent the time and put in the work in private in order to become the best. So nobody sees them practice. They only see the performance. And your interview is going to be the exact same way. So when you walk into an interview, it's kind of like game day. You're only going to have 30 minutes to an hour to perform. And the level at which you perform is entirely based on how much practice you do on your own, in your own time, in private, with nobody watching you. So, without preparation and practice, you are essentially setting yourself up for failure. And one of the things that I heard that I absolutely loved, and I constantly remember this for myself in all areas of my life, but you're only ever going to perform at the highest level of your practice. You will always fall to your highest level of preparation. A lot of people think that they can perform a lot higher than their practice. They can't. If anything, that's overconfidence / arrogance. Because you will only ever be able to do what you've been practicing. So, you'll be praised in public for what you practice in private. All right, so I want to bring back up this chart because we talked about this in terms of habit creation, if you remember in Module 4. But this is also really relevant for your interviews. Because if you can get your content, your responses, your stories, if you can practice your content to the point where you hit that bottom right quadrant, which is unconscious competence, where they can ask a question and you immediately know what you're going to say. It just starts flowing out of you. And because you know what you're going to say, you sound a lot more confident. You sound more natural. You're more conversational. The interview is going to go so much better than the other people interviewing for the position. So why we need to prepare and practice? Well, the first part is when you spend time ahead of the interview, preparing and practicing, you're going to be able to think a lot more deeply because you have a lot more time to think, to analyze, to reflect, which means that you're going to structure and create a lot better responses than people who are just trying to think in 3 seconds on the fly. And then once you create and structure these responses, you're then going to have time to practice talking through them and practice communicating them until the point where it does sound natural and it flows and it sounds smooth and fluid. And then what that will allow you to do is when you're in the interview, when everyone else is trying to think about what to say, because you already know what you're going to say, to call it 80% or more of the responses, you'll actually be able to think more critically during the interview because you're not trying to think of a response. Instead, you'll be thinking about how can I best position my response to influence the interviewer or to get my point across. And that's going to allow you to perform at a higher level than other people who want the position or talking with the interviewer or whoever, recruiter, whoever it is that's interviewing you. So this is not just me just bringing this up and saying you should do this. It's if you look at the greats, the people who are the best across all industries, and I have 3 examples here on the screen, but the best actors in the world know their lines cold before they ever try to improv. And the best quarterbacks know their plays cold before they ever try to call an audible live on the field with only 4 seconds. And the best leaders always know their strategies cold before they ever try to make changes on the fly. So you're going to want to put yourself in the same position as the top performers. You know your content, you've practiced it, you know it cold, so that when you're actually in the interview performing live, you're going to be able to call audibles and make changes intuitively. Okay, so mastering your content will make you more confident, more natural, and more thoughtful. And that's kind of the summary of why you need to do the practice. And I know it's not the most fun thing in the world, but it's important work, and it will benefit you greatly in your career. So let's start diving into the preparation. So we already overviewed what we're going to be preparing. So bringing this back up, which we had in part 1, this is the conversation that you're going to be having in your interview. It's going to start with intros and maybe a little bit of small chat. And then it's most likely going to transition into them asking questions about your background, your skills, your knowledge, your experiences, etc. And that's where most people stop. But what we want to do is we want to then make it a conversation by us asking them questions and interviewing them. And we also want to end by pitching our value. Because again, you're a business, you're a service provider, you must pitch your value to them. All of this together, along with how well you're communicating in the interview, is going to determine your subjective value and how you're perceived by the interviewer. And the 3 words of kind of the tonality and how we want to approach it is we want to be pleasant, respectful, but we also want to be serious about our value. So let's start diving in. And the first part that we're going to talk about is how do you introduce yourself? How do you talk about your background? And this is kind of infamous. A lot of people, this is sometimes the hardest question for people. They're like, how do I tell my story? And there's a million different responses out there of how people think you should tell it. The most important thing is how confident are you? How structured is your response? And does it sound smooth? Is it short? Does it cover the material? And do you sound confident? So this could be asked by the interviewer in many different ways. Maybe they say, tell me a little bit about yourself, or can you walk me through your resume, or please share your background, whatever. If it's in the beginning of the interview, they're just looking for you to tell your story. Now, the reason your story is so important is because you're setting the first impression for you as a professional. If you botch your story, if you just hack this thing together, it runs on forever. It's like 5 minutes long. The interviewer goes, oh my gosh, I still have another half an hour with this person. They've already written you off in their mind. So your story is really setting the tone for the entire conversation. It's kind of like imagine yourself in a bar and or at a coffee shop, whatever. You talk to someone and immediately you say, hey, where are you from? And they go on and on and on and on and on. You just go, oh man, I need to get out of this conversation. Well, if you're an interviewer, you can't get out of the conversation. You're stuck. But that's what they're thinking. So it needs to be solid. It needs to be concise. You get it out in 2 to 2.5 minutes, and it covers your history. Okay, so it's an overview in a logical sequence of career decisions. So what you don't want them to think at the end of your story is, well, it sounds like things just fell together, like you were kind of flying by the seat of your pants. Instead, what we want to do is we want to link everything together so it sounds like you strategically made decisions to move from one place to another, to another, to another. Now, if that's the case or not, doesn't matter. It needs to sound like that was the case. Maybe truthfully, you had something blow up in your personal life, or something crazy happened, or you really didn't have a reason. You just kind of took it for no good reason. Well, you can't let the interviewer know that. The interviewer needs to believe that you're a strategic, thoughtful person and that the decisions you made in your career were thought through. and deliberate. Okay, so clear, concise, and structured, and you don't want to dive in too much to anything in particular because you want to allow them to ask follow-up questions after your story. So how we're going to approach the story is you're going to start off by just mentioning where you're originally from. Where did you grow up? And this is just something really quick. 3 to 5 seconds. Sure, I'm originally from X place. And the reason you want to include where you're from is you never know who's going to be from the same area. Maybe the interviewer is from there or has a family member there or friends there or knows someone from there. If you're providing the opportunity to create a connection with them. So and it just says something about your background, your culture. If you grew up in a different country, well, that's going to tell them a lot more about you. Or maybe you grew up in a specific state or a specific place if you're in the United States. If you grew up in the East Coast versus the West Coast, they're very different cultures. So it gives a lot of context when you tell someone where you grew up. So after that, then you want to mention where you studied and what you studied. So where you went to college and what was your major, what was your focus or concentration. And then you want to transition into your first professional experience. Now, if you're a recent graduate, or actually if you're still in college or a recent graduate or only like 1 or 2 years out of college, it might be relevant to still bring up internships. But if you're more than 2 years out of college, it really doesn't make sense to bring up internships unless there's one specific reason why. Like maybe you interned at the company in college and then you're coming back to the company 5 years later and you want to mention the fact that you interned there. That makes sense. But for the most part, if you're 2 or more years out of college, or really sometimes even 1 or more years out of college, you're not being hired because of your internship experience. They're hiring you because of your skills, your knowledge, and your professional experiences, which really starts after college. So from this point on, kind of for the rest of this video and this recording, I'm going to assume that you are more than 1 to 2 years out of college and you're primarily going to be relying on your professional experiences. So you're going to start with your first professional experience, mention 2 to 3 primary responsibilities. So what were you doing in this position? And then you want to mention, why did you decide to make a transition to the next position? Now, again, even if you think about, well, truthfully, I didn't really have a reason, you need to create a reason. You need to think through what is a good way to position that career change, because you do not want to come across as someone who just blindly makes decisions without any thought to it. So you got to think through, how can I connect this position to my second position? And we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but you never want to badmouth anyone. Don't badmouth a bad manager. Don't badmouth a position, a company, a situation, a client, a customer, anybody. And the reason for that is, truth be told, many people do leave their positions because of a manager or because of a certain job or their responsibilities. But you never want the interviewer to believe that you're running away from something. You always want them to believe that you were forward thinking and you had a wonderful experience at the company. You learned a lot, you grew, you became even more valuable, but you wanted something. And so you actively made the decision to pursue it. That's what you want the interviewer to believe. Okay, so you actively made the decision to go to your second professional experience. You mentioned the 2 to 3 things that are most important and relevant to the position that you're interviewing here. And you include those responsibilities. And then again, you want to link that to the next professional experience. So you're pretty much going to be moving through your professional experiences until you get to your current or most recent position. And then you're going to do similar. You're going to talk about the 2 to 3 primary responsibilities that you had. And then you want to start bringing in where you are now, actively pursuing the next position. And that active seeking of the next position is them. That's the position you're interviewing for. So maybe this was, you wanted to take your career in a new direction because you had several conversations and you were networking and you discovered that this was absolutely what you wanted to do. Well, that's going to be, you're painting the picture of, I'm leaving my current position, or I left my most recent position because I wanted to pursue this. And this needs to align with what you're interviewing for. So once you mention that that's why you actively began searching for new opportunities, You then want to mention that you've had the opportunity to speak with people within the industry, within your target position, and at the company, and it was through those conversations that you discovered that this opportunity was absolutely what you wanted to pursue. Now, in terms of the networking and mentioning that you networked with people at the company, only say that if you actually and truly have spoken with people at the company, which if you're following this process, you most likely have, but sometimes something pops up where you haven't had the chance to. You never want to get caught lying with that, because sometimes in an interview, the interviewer might ask, well, oh my gosh, that's great. Who have you had the chance to speak with? If you're lying about it, that you've lost the interview right there. They're going to see right through it. Okay, so you mentioned that's how you discovered this opportunity, and then you want to finish by saying something along the lines of, so I'm extremely interested in this opportunity. I'm excited to have this conversation today, and thank you again for your time. So you're explicitly expressing your interest, and then you're thanking them for the opportunity to talk with them today about the opportunity. Okay, so now let's talk about how do you prepare for their questions, and how do you make sure that your responses are high quality? Because it's not about just answering the question, it's about giving them a strategically positioned response that puts you in the best light possible. So you're going to be able to prepare for about 80% of the interview. And the reason you're not going to be able to do 100% is you will never be 100% prepared for the interview, ever. And that's the point that eats away at a lot of people, is they walk in thinking, I'm not fully prepared. And then that thought creates the anxiety, the stress, and their lack of self-confidence. And they feel like they're constantly on their heels just hoping to get through these questions. By knowing that you're not going to be fully prepared, you're going to walk in feeling confident that 80% of this interview I'm going to crush, absolutely, because I know I'm prepared for it. And then the other 20%, you feel confident, and you will do your best to answer the questions that you could not have predicted. And in that 20%, always keep your target audience in mind. What are their needs? What are their problems? What are their desires? And always remember that whatever they're looking for and any story that you bring up, you want to strategically position it to what that interviewer wants. Okay, so now let's talk about the 6 areas of preparation for your interview. You're going to have your 3 fundamentals, and I like to call the fundamentals your story, why this position / company, and why are you leaving your company, or why did you leave your company? And really that second question, why this position and company, is why this opportunity? Why are you interested in this career opportunity? The second area of preparation is what I call job description, extraction, and preparation. I know that's a mouthful, but what you're doing here is you're taking the job description, you're pasting it, and then you're literally going through it line by line and preparing responses for every single part of the job description. And I'll show you what that looks like in detail, but the reason that's so important is that's what's going to get you to the 80% ready for the interview, for that specific company and specific position. Okay, the third area is going to be doing your company research and making sure that you know the company, the product, the service, the industry, what's been going on at the company over the last 3 to 6 months. You have a general context and awareness for the company. And this is important because if you know nothing about the company, you're immediately communicating to the interviewer, I'm not actually interested. Because if you were actually interested, you would know the company, the product, the service, the industry, etc. Okay, now the fourth area is your professional experiences and being able to summarize them. And we'll talk about that. The fifth area is behavioral and situational questions. And how do you prepare stories so that you have a bag of preloaded, pre-prepared, practiced, and mastered stories, so that if they ask any of these types of questions, tell me about a time when, or anything along those lines, you're going to have a story ready. And then the last part is technical questions. And this will be very, very different depending on what type of position you're shooting for. A banking position is very different than a consulting position. A consulting position is very different than a corporate development position. A corp dev is very different than business development or account management. And that's very different than a supply chain or an operations role, which is and on and on. So depending on what position you're going for, there will be knowledge-based or skill-based questions that are the technical questions that you must prepare for. Okay, so all of your responses for the most part in an interview should be, and I would actually say not even 2 minutes, but anywhere from a minute to 2.5 minutes. And the reason for that is you want to keep everything concise. If they want to know more, they'll ask follow-up questions. Sometimes people go on and on and on about a past experience, and they'll talk for 4 or 5 minutes straight trying to, they're literally vomiting everything up at once. Maybe only the interviewer wanted to know like 10% of that. Because you talk so much, you gave the interviewer things that he or she really didn't care about. So you want to keep everything concise. Ask the question that you've actually been asked. And if they want to know more, they'll ask a follow-up question. So they're asking questions because they're looking for something. And you never want to forget that. When you're going in, they have a list of questions, or they'll come up with questions during the conversation because they're looking for something. They're looking for skills. They're looking for knowledge. They're looking for culture fit. They're looking for an explanation as to why something happened in the past, because they're trying to marry you to whether or not you're a good fit for the position in question. So after they ask a question, what I recommend is take a breath or two. One, and immediately from there, that gives you about a second to actually think through, what was I just asked? And in that breath, you can also ask yourself, why are they asking this question? What are they looking for? What's the need or the desire behind this question? And then when you take that extra breath or two and you've thought through that, then you can deliver a strategically positioned or a targeted response. All right, so now let's go into each of the 6 areas and all the different types of preparation you'll need to do. So let's start with the 3 fundamentals. So we already talked about the story, and also you're going to have a worksheet that has all this summarized within it. So we talked about the story in that layout, but now let's talk about, why are you interested in this opportunity specifically? And they might say this as, why are you interested in our company, or why are you interested in this position? You're going to need to include both in the response. So how I recommend approaching this question is have 3 reasons. 3 reasons why you're most interested in this opportunity. And what I recommend for reason number 1 is talk about why you're interested in this position and the opportunity for your career. So talk about the skills, talk about the knowledge that you'll gain, talk about the professional experience that you want to build within that position. And then after you talk about why it's a strategic next step in your career, then you want to talk about the company and why you're interested in the mission that the company is pursuing, whether through their product or service, the culture and the people at the company. The best way that I love this second response, if you've been networking with people at the company, the simplest way to approach this second reason is talk about, 1, why you love what the company does, so their actual mission. But then you can talk about, I've had the opportunity to speak with quite a few people here at the company, and based on those conversations, I would love to work alongside those types of people. Well, immediately what you've communicated to the interviewer when you said that is, I've talked to people here, I know what they're like, I love the conversations, and I believe I fit the culture. That's a huge green light for the interviewer. And then the third reason to wrap up this response would be the fact that by having this opportunity, you will be growing and developing yourself, which is going to be putting you in line with what you desire for your long-term career plan. It's important for the interviewer to believe that if they hire you, you're going to stick around. No company wants to hire you and then see you leave after 12 months or see you leave after 2 years, because they've just spent an enormous amount of time and energy and money training you and getting you up to speed and investing in you and hopefully getting a long-term return on you, which is you're going to move up within the company, take on leadership roles, train more people, and build the company. So this reason number 3 is really you stating that having this opportunity, you know that there's a career path within the company into leadership, and that's something that you definitely could see yourself within 3 to 5 years, hopefully with a leadership position or even a higher strategic position within the company. So summarizing again, this third reason, you're making sure that the interviewer believes that there's an opportunity that you're attracted to within the company to be there long term and develop yourself. Okay, so now kind of the third fundamental is, why are you interested in leaving your company, or why did you recently leave your last company? So how I recommend doing this is breaking it into 3 parts. So one is, you're going to want to state 2 to 3 exceptional growth opportunities and experiences that you had at your current company or at your most recent company. And you never want to badmouth the company. And again, this is where I mentioned earlier that you really might have been running away from a manager, or from a company, or a horrible culture, or horrible work hours, or horrible pay. You never want to bring any of that stuff up in an interview. And especially never talk about compensation, because if they know that you were paid like garbage in a previous position, they're going to know, oh man, we could lowball them and they'll take the position, because anything better than, horrible, they'll take, because they're currently paid horrible. So always be careful with compensation. Okay, so 2 to 3 really great things, whether it's developed skills or knowledge that you built, or exposure to clients or customers, or professional experiences that you had that have developed you to the point where you're ready to move on and add a lot more value to the next company. You want to paint a really bright picture that I am valuable, because the last 2 to 3 years I've been doing really cool things. Okay, so you mentioned good things about your current company and how you've grown. And then you want to restate the fact that you're pursuing the next step. And you've already mentioned at this point why you're pursuing that in your story. So you restate, you were exploring the next career option. You were talking with people through networking, and through those conversations, you realize that this opportunity directly aligns with what you want for your long-term career. And then the last part is you just blatantly restate the fact that I'm very interested in working in this position specifically within your company. And you want to make it, again, very direct. I'm specifically interested in working this position at your company. Okay. So now let's talk about the second area of preparation: job description, extraction, and preparation. So that's a mouthful. What we're going to do is, pretty much what you're taking is your professional experiences and achievements, and you're strategically positioning for every bullet point on the job description. And by doing so, you're going to cover about 80% of your bases when interviewing. And the reason this is effective is the hiring managers or the recruiters, they're the ones who wrote the job description. And they're most likely the ones who are preparing the interview process. So if you've completely prepared for everything on the job description, you're going to be very well prepared for the questions that are most likely written for the interview. So we're going to draft examples and achievements for everything listed: skills, knowledge areas, requirements, as well as preferred. And there's a framework. You might be familiar with STAR, and you've probably heard of STAR or CARL or something like that. So the idea behind this is, when you answer a response that's story-based, so tell me about a time when, or tell me about your experience here, or something like that, STAR framework says situation, task, action, result. So as an example, they might have said, all right, well, tell me about a time when you had to take on a new project, and how did that project end up? Well, the situation, you'd be going through what was the situation, the task, which is what did you need to do, action, what did you actually do, and then what was the result. Now, the problem with that is it doesn't sell. It only tells. And all of your responses should somehow, some way, be positioning you as a great applicant for the position. And that's why I created this framework, so CAOB, which is similar, but the end is different. So context, action, outcome, and then the benefit. What is the benefit to the interviewer? What is the benefit to the company if they were to hire you? So again, if I were to just use that simple example that I just gave, tell me about a time when you had to lead a project and how did it end up? Well, the context is, you're going to talk about the context of the project. The action is what did you actually do to lead that project? What was the outcome of the project? But then the benefit is the fact that you are aware that this position is going to require a lot of leadership for multiple different projects. And you believe that previously you've been able to prove that you can manage your time well across multiple projects and still get the desired results. So what the benefit that you're selling to the interviewer is I can manage projects, as you've seen in this story, and I can do it for you too. Okay. So in terms of using the job description and preparing for everything bullet pointed or everything listed within it, it sounds too simple to be true, but you're literally just going to go through it line by line. And again, it's not going to be the most fun thing you've ever done in your life, but I promise you it is worth your time. It's very worthwhile. Okay, so this is an example of a Fortune 500 financial analyst job description. I pulled it and I'm going to show you literally line by line. So the very first bullet point is they're looking for 2 to 4 years of practical exposure to some of the following areas: FP&A, evaluating business performance, financial accounting, and control. Well, depending on what your experience is, maybe you have experiences in 1, 2, or all 3 of those areas. Well, you're going to think through, okay, what experiences do I have across these 3 areas? And I'm going to come up with 2 or 3 CAOB or CAOB achievement stories that I'm prepared for in practice. So if they were to say, all right, well, what kind of experience do you have with financial planning and analysis? You immediately have a prepared story in the context, action, outcome, benefit framework. Okay, so functional finance experience is a plus. So do you have finance experience within marketing or sales, research, development, operations, procurement? Well, again, if you have experience in any of those areas, you're going to create more stories so that if they were to say, well, can you tell us about any experience you might have in marketing, in functional finance within marketing? You immediately have a prepared story to walk them through. Moving on to the bullet points. So where it says skills and capabilities, well, they want someone with experience with forecasting and budgeting. Phenomenal. Let's create a story or 2 about your experience with forecasting and budgeting. And then they want strong analytical skills and the ability to translate analytical findings into actionable solutions and processes. Okay, well, you're going to create 1 or 2 stories about a project or a team effort or something in the past where you had to take data and analyze the data and then translate that into something actionable, whether it was a new way of operating or a new way of building something, etc. But you're giving them a tangible story. Ability to function effectively in a team environment and gain the cooperation of individuals across the organization. Okay, well, here you're going to create a story or 2 about a time when you had to work cross-collaboratively with other divisions or other teams in order to achieve a common goal, a common outcome. Strong verbal and written communication skills to effectively interact with all levels of management, as well as clearly communicate business results. Great. So you're going to come up with 1 or 2 stories about times or experiences when you had to communicate to a group of people or put together a written report or lead a presentation to senior management or to a client or a customer. Strong influencing skills. Come up with a story, 1 or 2 stories about when you had to influence somebody and how did you actually go about influencing them. Results oriented with the ability to initiate and lead projects to completion. Well, in this case, they might ask a question, something along the lines of, well, tell us about a time when you actively chose to take lead on a project and how did things end up? Well, you know that this is going to be coming, so you're going to want to create 1 or 2 stories about times when you initiated and created projects or when you took a step forward and led a project and how did it end up. So innovative thinker with a focus on continuous process improvement, come up with 1 or 2 stories in context, action, outcome, benefit framework where you improved a process. Proficient in Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint. Here you could come up with examples where in the past I had to create this type of a presentation, which meant that I had to do analysis in Excel and then export those analyses, put them into a comprehensive PowerPoint presentation, which I then communicated and delivered to my team leader or to senior management or to a customer or a client, etc. And then willing to travel. That last part I didn't bring up, but if who knows? If they ask, are you willing to travel? Maybe you have stories about the past where you traveled all the time and you loved it. You enjoyed it. Okay. So in terms of the third area of preparation that you need to dive into is company research. Now, this should not be an insanely deep, 30-hour exercise. The most important thing when you think about company research is know enough so that if they ask questions about what do we do, what do you believe our culture is like, what's been going on, and what are we focused on in the future, those very simple types of questions, you feel prepared enough that you can speak to the company, the products, the services, what's been going on at the company for the last 3 to 6 months, what they're currently focused on and achieving. If the interviewer doesn't believe that you're truly interested in their company, they're not going to hire you. That's the biggest takeaway. Because if people who are passionate or excited about what they do, they will always outperform people who are not. So they will always hire someone who's interested in their company over someone who's not. Okay, so areas for company research. These are the 4 areas I recommend you start diving into. And this is broken out more specifically in the actual worksheet following this part 2. But so 1 is you're going to want to understand and research the culture and the values of the company. Usually that's on like a mission page or our core values or something on their website. But these are the best way to get all this information too is talk to people within the company. Hands down, the fastest, easiest, most efficient, and most accurate picture of the culture and the values and really the product, services, everything about the company. Networking, people are your greatest resource. People are your greatest asset. Number 2, knowledge of the company's products, services, competitors, and industry. Number 3 is the company news. Maybe not even 6 months, but 3 to 6 months back. You need to know what's been going on. What initiatives are they currently undergoing? And then also what are their plans for their future? And then basic facts about the company. How big is the company? Where are they located? And you really should know their leaders. And the leaders, you can think of this as departmental as well. If you're working within marketing, you should really know who is the leader of marketing within the company. If you're in operations, you should know who is leading operations at the company, etc. So the 4th area of prep is professional experience summaries. And you're going to need to be able to quickly summarize any professional experience in your background. So the way that they might ask for this is a super generic question where maybe they say, please tell us about your position at your past company. And they just say at X company. Well, it's super broad. And the thing is there's 2 real questions going on here. One is they actually do want to know about your experience, but 2, they're purposely asking you a very generic question because they want to see how well do you structure responses. How clearly and concisely can you communicate? So you got to be able to summarize a large professional experience, and maybe you've been working somewhere for like 3 or 5 years. You're like, oh my God, there's so much to talk about. In that case, it's a challenge, but you need to have this down to about 2 to 2.5 minutes, 2.5 minutes max. So your summary for your current or previous position, it should include responsibilities, 2 to 3 achievements, and then you're going to want to describe 2 or 3 things in terms of skills or knowledge areas that are valuable for this position, which is you selling yourself again. Okay, so if we were to break this down in terms of step 1, step 2, step 3, so let's say they say, all right, well, tell us a little bit about your experience at company. The first thing you're going to want to do is describe your responsibilities. And again, focus on the responsibilities that are the most relatable and most transferable for the position that you're interviewing for. Then after that, you want to highlight 2 to 3 of your most important and relevant achievements or results. And think of these as the bullet points that you have on your resume. Because on the resume, you have bullet pointed the most important things that you did, your achievements, your outcomes. Well, you're going to need to decide what are the 2 or 3 that I want to talk about. I want to bring these up because I know they will sell me the best in this interview. Those are the 2 to 3 achievements that you highlight. And again, don't dive into them. Allow them to ask the follow-up question because you're not sure which one they're going to be most interested in. So all you do is you highlight them, you bring them up, and then you finish by describing 2 or 3 skills or knowledge areas that you developed and you believe will be very relevant and valuable for the position that you're interviewing for. This experience summary will go over very, very well in the interview because you're describing what you were responsible for, what you did, what were your biggest achievements, and then why is it relevant to them in this opportunity. So In this bottom part, you can see I have the interviewer will likely ask follow-up questions about your achievements, and you want to have context, action, outcome, benefit, structured response prepared for all of the achievements that you mention. You're going to need to be able to talk about that in detail. Okay, so now the fifth area of prep is going to be behavior and situational questions. And what you're going to be creating are what I call power stories that are malleable. You can morph them, change them, twist them, and you can use them for many, many, many different types of questions that the interviewer might ask you. So, interviewers try to understand how you behaved in the past and how you performed in the past in order to try to predict how you're going to behave in the future and how you'll perform in the future. That's why they ask these backwards-looking, historical-based questions. They're trying to predict your future. How will you perform and act in the future? Okay, so every position is different situations, but there are several common situations. So what I mean by this is if you're interviewing for a finance position or a marketing position or a sales position or an engineering position, they're going to be asking very different types of situational questions. So I would say maybe 30 to 40% of situational questions will be dependent on the type of position that you're interviewing for. But there's also a lot of common situational questions. So think of these as questions like, tell me about a time when you had a problem with a manager and you had to resolve it. Well, almost every interview you have, they're going to be asking these types of similar situational questions. So you're going to think through what are these common, which I have laid out on the next slide, but then you're going to create a context, action, outcome, benefit story for all these common situations. And you're going to prepare those responses, practice them until the point where they become natural to you. You can easily bring them up, easily walk someone through them. So I want to quickly run through these 18, what I found to be very, very common types of questions that are usually brought up in interviews. And not all of them. That'd be horrible if you had an interview with all 18 of these. But the idea is by over preparing, you're going to be in the interview where maybe they only ask one or two questions, and you're going to already have 18 pre-built, pre-practiced, and mastered stories, and you'll be able to think through what is the best story I can use to answer this question. So what you're doing is you're creating a bag of stories. So when you're asked a question, all you have to do in the interview is reach in, choose the best story possible, and deliver the story. Or maybe sometimes they ask a question and you take out two stories and you literally combine them. You just put them together. Okay, so one, common situational questions. One, tell me about a time when you improved a system or a process. Number two, tell me about a time when you used technology and data to make better decisions. Three, tell me about what is your biggest achievement, or tell me about a moment that you're most proud of. Four, tell me about a time when you had to work with a teammate who was difficult to work with. How did you resolve it? Five, tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult manager or a customer, and how did you resolve it? Six, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your manager, and how did you handle the situation? Seven, tell me about a time when you had a tough challenge at work, and how did you overcome it? Tell me about a time when you had a big failure at work, or you had a disappointment in your position. How did you handle it? Number 9, tell me about a time when you had to pay extreme attention to detail. 10, a time when you had to lead a team initiative or a new project. And really, this is a leadership example. That's why I have that there in italics. It's a time when you led a project or you led a group of people, and what was the outcome? And how did you lead them? 11, tell me about a time when your idea was rejected or something didn't go your way. How did you handle that? 12, tell me about a time when you had to balance many different priorities and responsibilities with upcoming deadlines. So really what they're looking for here is how well can you manage your time? And do you have a process? Do you have a system for managing your time? And how do you deal under pressure? Do you prioritize things? Do you actively seek help when needed? A lot of people don't respond to this question well, because they all of a sudden start mentioning about, oh yeah, there was this time where I had to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and I got everything done. Well, that doesn't tell the interviewer how you did it. This is an important question because they want to know, how do you operate? How do you prioritize your projects? How do you constantly communicate with your manager or with your team? And then how do you set up your time so that you're actively moving everything forward? How do you manage stress, etc.? So that's an important one. Definitely prepare for that. Okay, 13, tell me about a time when you solved a difficult problem or developed a creative solution to a problem. 14, a time when you missed a deadline or made a mistake. And really, what did you do? How did you handle that? And then 15, tell me about a time when you had to make a non-popular decision. 16, tell me about a time when you had to make an ethical decision. Now, sometimes this ethical decision question can be difficult for some people. In order to get your brainstorming kind of kick off some ideas for you, I think the easiest way to think about this is doing what's right versus what's profitable. And that, for the most part, will open up a large number of stories for most people. And example, if you're in a client-facing role, well, there's many times where you could do something or not do something that would affect the client that the client would never know about. So the story here is, well, I did this thing, or I chose not to do this thing, even though I knew the customer or the client would know about it. I knew it was best for the client, or for the customer, or for the company, or for the team. So, ethical decision is an important one as well, and this is one that catches a lot of people off guard in interviews. Okay, so 17, tell me about a time when you had to teach yourself something difficult. And then 18, tell me about a time when you effectively persuaded, influenced, or motivated someone to do something. So, if you create stories for all 18 of these, you practice them and you master them, and you're comfortable and confident talking through these stories, you will be blown away at how well you can think on your feet and marry a story that you've already prepared to the question that you've just been asked in the interview. Okay, so the other thing you want to do is Google search for additional questions. Because again, if you're in a finance position or targeting finance versus marketing versus operations versus some type of engineering, there will be different situational questions or position-specific questions. So Google financial analyst situational interview questions, or financial analyst interview questions, or marketing manager interview questions, or operations director interview questions. And then you also want to search previous questions on Glassdoor, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. Okay, so every position may have different situational questions, which I talked about. You're going to still want to prepare CAOB responses for the common situational questions I just showed you, 1 through 18, but then also the additional position-specific questions that you find online or through Glassdoor or through any other means. You still want to create CAOB responses for those too. I know this sounds like a lot of prep. I promise you it's worth it. I know it's not going to be the most fun thing in the world. It's worth the time. It's worth the investment. Okay, so you're going to have these power stories, and they give you flexibility and confidence in the interview. And whatever question they ask, you will have different crafted and practice stories to choose from, so you can know and feel confident that I'm using the best possible example I could give them. If you've interviewed before, which I'm sure you have, I guarantee that you've probably had the feeling or the moment where you walked out of the interview and you said, oh, why did I say this? I should have said that. Or I should have brought this other story up. By going through and doing this work and thinking through your responses beforehand, your stories beforehand, you will never have that feeling, because you'll already know and have prepared all of your possible stories, and you'll always choose the best one in the moment. Okay, so the sixth and final area of prep is going to be your technical questions. And again, this is going to be specific to the position. So the best way that I recommend preparing for technical questions, which are going to be either skills or knowledge-based, one, speak to the professionals within your target position. If it's finance, talk to people in finance. If it's marketing, talk to people within marketing. If it's ops, talk to people within ops. Engineering, talk to people within engineering. And then secondly is you want to Google search those specific questions for the target position. And as an example, because my background is investment banking, when I was doing my prep for investment banking, I was typing in investment banking technical questions. Well, there was an enormous number of prep and skills-based and knowledge-based questions that I had to prepare for specifically for investment banking. It's the exact same thing for consultants. It's the exact same thing for different types of operations positions or different types of engineering positions. Okay, so then the third is I recommend reading the top 3 to 5 books relevant to your target position, or do an online course or any other type of personal development. And this is going to put you one step ahead of everyone else interviewing who's not doing this personal development. And then the last part is have someone who's more knowledgeable test you and have them give you feedback. So if you're shooting for banking or consulting, have an experienced banker interview you and mock interview you. Have a consultant interview you if you're going into consulting. If you're going to corporate development, have a corporate development person interview. If you're going to any other position, it's super helpful to have someone who already has that experience and knows what's important. Have them interview you and test you. Now, if we're working together, I'll also be doing this to the best of my ability. But for example, if you're an engineer, I'm not an engineer. Or if you're a director of operations, well, I will do my best to be able to have that competency. But there are people who've been in operations for 30 years, 40 years. There's people who've been in engineering for 10 years, 15 years. So if you can have an expert with deep industry experience or deep position experience, mock interview, always take that opportunity. Okay. So now we want to think through the next step in the conversation. So you've prepared for the responses, and now it's going to be your part of the interview where you ask them powerful questions. You interview them. So why this is important is you're going to be asking questions to help you make an informed career decision. One of the things that I think is really funny is many people kind of walk into an interview and expect that they want the job. They go in, they do their best to answer the questions. The assumption they have in their mind is, I need this position. This is a position I want. I believe this is an awesome opportunity. Well, how do you know it's an opportunity? What if you take the job and you absolutely hate it? You want to get that type of information out beforehand. And the way that you can do that is asking the right questions in the interview. So not only is this going to give you information that you need, but it's also going to communicate self-confidence and self-belief, because really what you're communicating is, I don't need this job. I have other opportunities. And when you give off that sort of confidence, it's going to increase your perceived value in the interviewer's eyes. And very, very rarely does an interviewer have a candidate challenge the opportunity to interview them. And you want to do that. You want to be that person and differentiate yourself. So you're going to uncover the information needed to make an informed decision. But then also, and I love this last point, by asking them really good questions, you'll get information that other people interviewing don't have. And with that information, you can better position yourself when you're pitching your value at the very end of the interview, or even in the follow-up email, the thank you email. So you'll want to ask 3 to 5 powerful questions that cover the following areas. So 1, questions on performance and management on the team, in the position, and at the company. 2, questions on current challenges for the team or future projects for the team, and team initiatives and goals forward looking. So maybe that's the next 3 to 6 months, next 12 months. And then questions on training and development, resources, and your career path within the company and the team. 4, questions for the interviewer about their experience at the company. And then finally, questions on the position and the team itself. So the last point here is kind of more of a rapport or a confidence demonstration. But if they've been taking really detailed notes when asking you questions, when you're asking them questions and they're responding, jot down several notes. Make it look like you're writing down a couple of the things that they're saying. And what that's going to be doing is you're mirroring them. And what you're showing them is, I'm considering you just as seriously as you're considering me. It increases your perceived value. Now, you don't need to literally write down everything. It's for the perception. You're showing them that you're also taking them pretty seriously and that you're evaluating them and you have other options. Okay, so examples for powerful questions might be, what led the team to hire for this position right now? What are the team's biggest challenges right now? What are the team's most important goals for the next 12 months? What current projects and initiatives is the team currently focused on? What important projects does the team plan to pursue in the future? And how are both team and individual performance tracked? What does the employee feedback process look like? How frequently will my performance reviews be held? How does the team and the company view promotions? Are promotions based on time or individual performance? What would workflow look like for this position? And who would I primarily be reporting to? Why did you decide to work for the company over other companies or opportunities within the industry? In your opinion, what are your favorite and least favorite aspects of working for the company? And which other internal or external teams would I frequently be working with? Now, there's a couple more. Are there any responsibilities or opportunities for this position besides those that are included on the job description? What types of training and resources are available for continuous development? What types of tools, systems, and processes does the team currently use? And this last question is very powerful. Based on your understanding of my experiences, skills, and knowledge, what is your biggest concern as to my ability to perform well in this position or on your team? Now, this last question is very important because at the end of the interview, there's two questions that you're going to want to ask before you pitch your value. This is one of them. And the reason this question is important is at the end of the interview, they're going to have a pretty good idea of whether or not they want to move you forward. And at the end of the interview, they're already going to have one or two things that they see as red flags or one or two things that they're mildly concerned about. By asking this question, you're bringing their concerns to the table so you have the opportunity to overcome them, to discuss why it's wrong or why you believe that you may have missed something that's super valuable for them. So this gives you the opportunity to overcome the objection that many other candidates will not have because they finish the interview, they walk away, and the interviewer has this in their mind, say, well, I'm really nervous about this. And then they decide to move on with someone else because they're not nervous about that thing with the other candidate. So you're interviewing them, and that is unusual for most recruiters and most hiring managers. Very rarely are interviewers put on their heels almost as if they're responding to interview questions. And you're asking these in a pleasant and a respectful manner, so it's not like you're aggressively asking these by any means. You're saying them with genuine curiosity and a respectful tone for them. So you're going to end your questioning by focusing on the team's current initiatives, goals, and desires for the coming months, and that flows nicely. So the way that, because I mentioned there were two questions that you want to finish with asking them on, the second to last question you're going to want to ask is about the team's current initiatives, goals, and desires for the coming months. The very last question that you want to ask is this final question that I mentioned, which was based on your understanding of my experiences, skills, and knowledge, what's your biggest concern as to my ability to perform well in this position? That's the very last question. This is the second to last question. Okay. Now, final piece here is never ask a question, not just don't, but never ask a question that you already know the answer to. You should be learning something new from every question. And if you already know the answer, it just shows. Your eyes you just don't seem as interested in the response. And because of that, it comes across as fake and it doesn't end well. Okay, now this final part, pitching your value. How do you go about structuring your value pitch? Now, I promise it's a lot easier than you'd think. You want to start it off by introducing it something along the lines of, I believe there are 3 strong ways I can add value to your team. First, explain it. Second, explain it. And lastly, explain your value prop. And you finish with, I think these 3 qualities would transfer really well to the position, and I'd love for the opportunity to be a part of your team. Now, how this naturally fits in, there's 2 different ways that you're potentially, or you will pitch yourself in an interview. One is they'll ask a question that is a strengths question. So they'll say, well, what do you believe are your strengths and how are those relevant to this position? Well, if they ask for your strengths, you're pitching yourself. You want to bring this out. I believe there are 3 strong ways that I can add value to your team. 1, 2, 3. Those are your 3 strengths. Or they might ask, well, why should we hire you over any of the other applicants? Well, they're asking, why are you different? You're going to pitch yourself. That's where you bring out this response. But if they don't ask a question that naturally brings out this response when you pitch yourself, at the very end of the interview, after you've asked your questions, and right when it seems like you're about to wrap up the interview, maybe they're closing their books or something like that, you want to bring up the fact that, well, hey, if you don't mind, I'd really like to, share why I believe I'm a good fit for this position. Well, they know that you're going to pitch yourself and absolutely take that opportunity. Or maybe they'll say, well, all right, well, that's all the questions. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add? That's where you say, yes, I'd really love for the opportunity to share why I believe I'm a good fit for this team. And they'll say, all right, yeah, sure, we'd love to hear it. Pitch yourself right there and then. Okay, so these value propositions, the first value prop, the second value prop, and the third, these should be aligned with your strategic positioning from your resume, your LinkedIn. I mean, you've done the research. You know what your audience wants. You know what's most important to them. These are the 3 things that you've targeted that need to be communicated. And by hitting these 3 things, you're kind of doing a giant checklist in that interviewer's mind. Wow, we're looking for this. They said they have it. This, have it. This, have it. Okay, so I'll leave you with a Chris Voss quote. And Chris Voss he was previously an FBI hostage negotiator, and he's an industry leader in negotiation. One of the quotes that he has is, your last impression is your lasting impression. And I think this is so relevant for your interview. So in the interview, you're going to have 2 impressions that are super important. One is the impression that you form, your first impression in the interview, which is your story. But then at the end of the interview, when you pitch yourself, that's your lasting impression. Someone who's confident, someone who believes in their value, and pitch themselves to the interviewer. Very, very, very few people ever pitch themselves in an interview. So by making that your final and last impression, you will absolutely differentiate yourself from almost everyone else interviewing for the position. So never forget, you are a service provider to the marketplace. You must pitch your value, and you want that as your lasting impression. Okay, so now let's talk about how to actually practice your responses. Now, there's going to be several ways that you want to do this in order. So you're going to want to start by practicing by yourself. The very first part of practicing is going to be just mastering your content. So when you're preparing your responses, you're going to be bullet pointing out your responses. And you bullet point out your responses, you're going to practice talking through them. So maybe the way that you could think about this in terms of mastering your content is you have your responses pulled up in front of you, bullet pointed, and you practice talking through them. Once you believe that you're confident talking through them, then ask yourself the question and then start looking away. So you're no longer looking at the bullet points. If you can ask yourself the question and not even look at the bullet points and get through the response, you know that you've mastered the content. Now, once you've mastered the content, you want to master tonality, which is how do I sound when I'm delivering this response? And then the third part is master delivery, which is your nonverbal, how you actually look, your hand gestures, your facial expressions. Are you smiling? Do you seem engaged? That's the physical delivery. Once you've done the practice by yourself, you then want to begin mock interviewing. So if we're working together, we'll be doing mock interviews. If we're not working together, you still want to find either friends or family member or someone to be doing these dry run mock interviews with. And the difference between, or at least what I call the difference between a dry run and a serious mock. A dry run is where you're asked a question, you go through the response, and then you talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and you iterate and improve the response, and then you keep practicing from there. So it's kind of back and forth, back and forth. A serious mock is where whoever's mock interviewing you has a list of questions, and they go through the list as if it were a real interview. So there's no back and forth like a friend helping a friend. Okay, so tonality. The best way to practice tonality is record your responses on your phone. I promise you, it's going to be uncomfortable. Nobody likes hearing themselves. But when you practice your responses and listen to it afterwards, you will hear, do I sound like I'm reading? Do I sound boring? Do I sound super monotone? Imagine if you were to interview with someone and they talked exactly like this the entire time and they never altered their tone of voice. Well, in a normal conversation, people are always altering their tone of voice. If someone is excited about something, they start talking faster and their pitch goes up and they start. And then if someone's really boring or really depressed or blah, their tonality changes too. The interviewer wants to feel comfortable and have a natural conversation with you. By listening to your responses beforehand, you'll actually be able to hear, do I sound super boring and monotone? Do I sound nervous? Or do I sound like conversational, lively, someone who you'd actually want to talk to? And that's what you want to shoot for. And then the last part is record yourself on your laptop or your phone so you can actually visually see yourself respond. A lot of people think so intensely on what they're saying that they literally forget to smile, or they just look stressed or uncomfortable. And your body language will influence how the interviewer feels. And so you want to make sure that your facial expressions, your posture, and your gestures are all communicating the fact that you're comfortable, you're confident, you're excited to be there for this opportunity, and you're genuinely having a good conversation with the interviewer. So now I want to run you through the sheet, that the interview prep and practice worksheet that includes everything that we just talked about. And working through this, I promise you will hit that point where you are 80% ready for the interview. Okay, so this is what you will be downloading and working through. So I'll zoom in here so you can see this. So on the top, I've kind of laid out that there are the different sections that you'll be preparing for. So your 3 fundamental questions, the job description, extraction, and preparation, your value contribution pitch, your professional experience summaries, your behavioral and situational questions, how to go about doing company research and the topics to think through, and then technical skills and knowledge. So those 4 points of how to go about preparing for the technical questions, and then also questions and powerful questions for the interviewer. And I've included the examples down there as well. All right, so earlier I talked about doing research online for target position or position specific questions. So if you go to Glassdoor, so I've included the link there. If you go to Glassdoor, you're going to see different tabs, etc. If you click companies, so that should bring you to this company page. You can look up specific interview questions that have been asked previously by companies in interviews. So as an example, I'll just use Google because they're so big. And also too, not all companies, if it's a really small company that you're interviewing with, this may not even work. That's okay. You can still look at similar types of questions from other companies for the same type of position. Okay, so let's do Google, and let's say that we do New York. Okay, and then search. So you can see here it pops up with the different companies, and we're going to click on the main company page. And then you're going to see it says overview, reviews, jobs, salaries, interviews, benefits, photos. Well, all right, well, let's click interviews. And then see here where it says search job titles. This is where if it's marketing, if it's sales, if it's finance, if it's corporate development, if it's like software developer, anything, you search for the title there. And all right, so let's just do financial analyst as an example here. All right, so find interviews. And then you're going to see here, so it pops up with, where would it be? There are no interviews matching your search at this company. Okay, so that is probably because it's in New York. And actually, I'm pretty sure that they have within Chicago. So let's quickly change that to Chicago. Chicago. All right, so we're going to click back, and then let's go interviews. And now let's do... financial analyst. Boom. Okay, so now you can see so find reviews. Okay, so former employee, financial analyst. Former employee, financial, oh, this is New York here. Okay, so good, etc. Oh, these are reviews. Whoops, interviews. Okay, just for the sake of this, it looks like financial analyst is not popping up. If I wanted to take more time, I'm sure I could find it. But instead, just for an example, let's just bring in product manager. So let's click that. And then you can see where it says product manager interview. Well, it says, so this person did not receive an offer. They had a neutral experience and an average interview. Well, this person has included what questions they were asked. So tell me about yourself and why do you want to work here? Okay, well, that's a fundamental question. And then they did not get an interview. Interview questions. The first step is to pitch your plugin via email. In my case, I was lucky enough. Okay, so you can just see here that people include questions that they were asked. So regardless of whatever company you're interviewing for, sometimes if, and again, not every case is your company or the target position going to be on here, but it's worth looking for previous questions for your position. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is literally just Google for the position. So you can see here, it says Google search company interview questions for position. So in this case, I would do Google interview questions for financial analyst. And then I'll go through, okay, so Google senior financial analyst interview questions. Okay, so now it looks like this Glassdoor is popping up. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now it pops up. But by doing a Google search, you're going to find a lot of questions, and maybe it might not even be for Google. Maybe you'll start finding financial analyst interview questions for companies similar to Google. So both these methods are just for finding position-specific interview questions. And once you know those, you can also prepare for those ahead of time. Okay, so now the rest of this is breaking down these 8 functions or these 8 different areas to prepare for. So I'm not going to read through everything because we just reviewed everything in this video. So 1, you're going to have your 3 fundamentals. Those are laid out here, as well as questions for how to think through those. And then you're going to have your job description, extraction, and preparation. So you're going to want to copy and paste the position's job description that you're interviewing for and then go through that line by line. 3rd is your value contribution pitch. So I've included in here the outline, and you'll just fill in where it's red for yourself and the value props that you want to practice going through. 4th is professional experience summaries, and I've included here kind of work experience number 1, and then questions to help you or prompts to help you think through how to structure that response. And then if you have more experiences, so work experience 2, work experience 3, behavioral and situational questions. So I've included the 18 common questions here. But then I also mentioned that, again, you want to Google search and think of position-specific situational questions. So if you're interviewing for a sales position, they might say, well, tell me about a time when you had to overcome a really tough objection. Well, that is a position-specific situational question. So that might not be one of these 18. Okay. So then 6 is company research. And I've included here the 4 areas that you should be doing research on and feel comfortable with for the company. And then 7, technical skills and knowledge. I've included the 4 best ways to prepare your technical skills for your target position. And then finally is 8, preparing powerful questions for your interviewer. And I've included the several of the examples that we talked through in this video. I've included those examples here as well. And then finally is the outline for how to think through practicing your responses. So thank you for bearing with me for this whole video. I know that this was a longer video, but I can't stress enough how important it is to prepare and practice ahead of the interview. It is one of the least underrated or most underrated part of getting the position that you really truly do desire. Because a lot of people, they go in overconfident, they don't prepare, and they wing it. And it's the saddest thing to see someone get the opportunity that they want, and because they didn't do the work beforehand, practicing, preparing, and making sure that they're ready to go, the opportunity that they want literally slips through their palms and through their hands. And it's so sad. So don't let that be you. Sit down, do the work, focus, and make sure that you're doing the networking to get the opportunity. And once you have the opportunity, you've done the interview prep, so you're ready to absolutely crush the interview. Awesome. So this is it for part 2. In part 3, we're going to actually talk about how to prepare on the day of, or the day of the interview, game day. Thanks, and I'll see you in part 3.